Welcome to Illuminati Silver's Inner Sanctum, where we tell you the truth about silver, precious metals, economics, and politics. Today is Thursday, the 7th of February 2019, and we're going to look at an article in yesterday's The Times newspaper, a leading British newspaper, entitled Web Police. The article has the subheading, "Social media firms are publishers with the same responsibilities as all publishers. Britain is overdue a debate about how they should be regulated and by whom." Now, before we actually read this article and continue with the discussion, you are no doubt asking, what has this to do with precious metals, politics, or economics? The answer, quite frankly, is directly nothing. However, there is a subversive or potentially subversive element within Western society, which has existed in Eastern societies for many years, which aims to pervade individuals' freedoms, rights, and privileges, but achieves this through what appears to be quite sensible, protective legislation and reasoning. And the reason for us debating this article is purely to see whether we believe it is the latter or the more conspiratorial former issue of state control. So let's read this article and you can judge for yourself. It goes as follows. About 350 million photographs are uploaded onto Facebook every day. One report in 2015 found that Americans spent an average of 9 hours a day on social media platforms. A calculation the year before found that users worldwide were in effect donating 15 million years of unpaid labour to the social network each year. Policing content online is a mammoth task, yet the costs of not doing so may be unaffordable. Margot James, the digital minister, announced yesterday that social media companies are to be required to sign up to a code of conduct to protect users, especially younger users. The government is known to be preparing a white paper on internet regulation. But Ms. James made particular reference to Molly Russell, a 14-year-old girl who took her own life in 2017. Her father, Ian Russell, has said he has, quote, "no doubt that Instagram helped kill my daughter," unquote. After Molly's death, her family found that she had been viewing material on several sites which focused on and sometimes glorified self-harm and suicide. The ease with which such content can be found is very clearly a problem. Less obvious, though, is a solution. No existing law prohibits this sort of content, and any new law which did so would raise free speech concerns. The grey area of social media companies being required by law to sign a quasi-legal code of conduct is also concerning, and reminiscent of some of the less liberal proposals suggested over the past few years for regulating the press. It is to be profoundly hoped that the government's white paper avoids stumbling into digital authoritarianism, where speech is not illegal, however unpleasant. There is a danger in regulating it into silence. Two things nonetheless are clear. The first is that social media companies are responsible for the content of their platforms. The second is that the same companies are responsible for the audiences they allow to access that content, particularly when they are young. With newspapers and other publishers, there is an expectation of liability, both legal and moral. Social media companies have resisted being seen as publishers, preferring to inhabit some unspecified and more profitable existence between being utilities, private clubs and public squares. This is disingenuous. Parallels between social media and traditional media are clear, but search giants serve a quite different function. If Twitter has a responsibility for the content that arrives on your feed, does Google have the same responsibility for the content that it allows you to search for? Other platforms, such as YouTube, raise quite different questions, as do the hosting services that provide the backbone of the internet itself. It may be that legislation has a role in limiting access to some forms of content, while defending the freedoms of others. Rather than risk controversy, many platforms may opt for censorial overkill. The comedian Matt Ford, for example, has noted that paid advertisements for his next show appear to have been blocked by Facebook because he is not registered as a political campaigner and they contain the word Brexit. Most social media is an American import, often formed around the presumptions of the First Amendment, which protects freedoms of speech. It is no coincidence that the strongest regulation faced by technology companies today, such as General Data Protection Regulation, comes from the European Union, where very different presumptions exist, chiefly about privacy. After leaving the EU, Britain has the opportunity to find its own path. A national debate is required to establish how regulated online speech should be, and what mechanisms can be used to regulate it. Yet an essential first principle already is that social media platforms must be responsible for the content they host. For some, this may be a complicated and expensive endeavour. That is their problem. Unquote. End of the article. So, in a relatively superficial way, this article addresses the debate between First Amendment rights of free speech versus protection of minors and citizens from harmful data, and also addresses the issue of publishers' rights and responsibilities. Where is the balance? And does there need to be one? Total free market thinkers will say you can publish absolutely anything you like. It's up to the person who reads it to take responsibility. A, whether they should read it or view it in the first place, and B, how they respond to it. That in itself seems logical to most normal thinking people, until you then begin to realize that not everyone is responsible. And also, young people in particular are impressionable, especially in their formative years. So should we be exposing them to certain aspects of life which are dark, cruel, and evil? It's an interesting debate and a difficult one to have. In terms of free speech, we also have to be mindful there is such a thing as hate speech, and particularly the use of free speech to incite criminality or violent behaviour. Again, to what extent should we as a society provide a level of protection? In addition to that, the laws are different in many countries. For example, you have the First Amendment in the United States, where you can more or less say anything. In the United Kingdom, while a member of the European Union, there are certain curtailments on the level of free speech, particularly as it veers towards hate speech and towards racism and sexism and all of the normal isms that one can comprehend, even to the extent that we could say something in the United Kingdom that may be normally legal, but then arrested by the police from another EU state because what we have said is not legal in their country. And because we are part of the European Union, we can be arrested, deported, and tried, which is one of the arguments for Brexit, which generally is not heard. The third issue is what responsibility should the publishers the web hosts, the search engines bear in relation to any inappropriate images, language, or incitations? And this is a difficult one to answer, because this is at the core of freedom to publish, freedom to speak out, and freedom to display more or less whatever one wishes to do. For example, if you film a policeman carrying out an unauthorized or illegal activity, how long would it be if regulations are so tight that the authorities prevent the publication of that film? This also has a bearing to some degree, admittedly to a lesser degree, but to some, on us who collect precious metals. Now, conspiracy theorists, and we're not condemning them when we use that term, but conspiracy theorists are of the opinion that one day our gold and silver holdings will be confiscated. At the very least, before that day occurs, if the internet, YouTube, and general social media is so tightly controlled, we may, subject to a potential economic collapse, not be able to support, propose, or recommend to others the holding of gold and silver assets. Who knows what the future may bring? What do you think? Is there enough regulation, not enough regulation, or too much regulation? Do share your thoughts. We shall be most interested to hear them. Disclaimer. Illuminati silver owners come from a background of banking, international wealth management, and economics. Having now retired from these worlds, we are not qualified to give investment advice. Therefore, this and other productions must not be deemed to be giving such advice and merely represent the personal views of its owners.